My name is Odessa Madeline Dutton, and I was born in Louisiana, Arkansas, May the 13th, 1934. Well, they lived in Arkansas on what was my grandfather on my daddy's side of the house, his place. They had been in California. I suppose he went out there for work. And they had been out there and they came back, and it was during the Depression then, and Grandpa was having a hard time paying the taxes on his place. And he asked all the other kids for money for the taxes, and they didn't have it. But Daddy did, so he paid the taxes on the home place. And so when Grandpa Sharon died, well, the place went to Daddy. And so that's where they lived when I was born. And of course, it was just right after the first part of the Depression, and Daddy was having a hard time finding work. So he caught a train, just like the hobos did. He rode the rails free. Anyway, he went to a hobo camp out there close to where the train was running, and when the train came by, well, he hopped on it, and he went to Odessa, Texas. And that's where they were hiring for Gulf Oil Company. And so he went to work out there, but we couldn't go at that time. He didn't have the money, or he wasn't off work long enough. And anyway, it was a year that he lived out there and worked in the oil field, and we lived on the farm there in Arkansas. Well, Grandma, she came to Crane one time to see us, while I was growing up, my mother's mother. And she was a little short lady. I'm shorter than Mama, and Mama was about the height I am now. And they were both, Mama was a lot like Grandma. And they were always doing something, cooking something in the kitchen. They made, what stood out in my mind is they made jelly out of the deals on prickly pears. And I was afraid to eat it because I was afraid it had stickers in it. But I think they dropped it in hot water and pulled the outer cover off of those before they bloomed, and that fruit was just what they used and they made jelly out of. And I think you can buy it in the stores, if you're a mind to now. But anyway, they did that, and Grandma, of course, you were busy doing something all the time, and Grandma had every one of us kids. I think I was in the first grade, and piecing quilts. And I know mine was just the little 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, blocks you sewed together. And then you sewed those together. It made a block about like that, and it was 3, 3, and 3. And you made those blocks, and then you put them together with a plain colored block and made a quilt top out of it. And then you quilted it. I didn't quilt it, but I made those blocks. She had us all, making quilt blocks, keeping busy. Of course, your cover, you didn't run out and buy a bunch of blankets and stuff. You had quilts, homemade quilts. And a lot of stuff that people buy now and don't think anything about, they didn't buy them, they made them themselves. And so you were busy a lot of the time doing stuff like that, which now they say, oh, we'll go buy this, or we'll go pick that up, or, Yeah, of course, we didn't have any TV. And when you played outside, and you were outside most of the day. You come in to eat something, but you were outside. Of course, we played with the neighbors or kids, that lived anywhere near. And you'd play Red Rover, where you'd throw that ball over the roof, and the other side, if they catch it, which you don't know, and you're watching, and if they catch it, they're running around the building and throw anybody they hit with a ball that you're out, So anyway, just things like that. And during that time, of course, you had, Mother had her gardens, and they lived on off the land, and which they were used to doing. And when it come time to butcher a hog, well, Mama and them looked up some of the people there in town that would help out, and this black man was going to help Mama and Grandma butcher the hog. But he didn't show up early enough to suit them, so they started the killing of the hog themselves. So anyway, they had it butchered and pretty well scraped, I think, by the time their help got there to go ahead and finish with the hog. But anyway, they went ahead and did the jobs that had to be done for you to live and on a place out in the country. You made your living. Daddy kept his farm until I was started into high school, and he sold it then. He kept the mineral rights on it, so of course I'm the only one left of the kids, but the other kids, other brothers and sisters had children, so I don't know what'll happen to the mineral rights. They still belong to the family. I had 3 older sisters and a brother. They were all older than me. I guess by the time I came along, they felt like this was a big mistake. They wasn't going to have any more. But anyway, we lived there in Crane. We lived in the Guff Camp when we first moved out there, but Daddy didn't have enough seniority to continue to live in the camp. The camp was a bunch of houses that they had built like a housing tract where they furnished for their employees to live in. But Daddy had just gone to work, so he just had a year with them, so he didn't have enough service with them to get a house out in the camp. And so Daddy built a house there in town. He bought, well, at that time, Crane was a small town, and well, it still is, but it was even smaller than it is now. And they had what was the size of about a block. That we had one or two neighbors that lived. One lived right next door, and the other one lived, maybe on the other side of the block. But we had enough room. We had a cow pen, and we had a hog pen across the road, and that whole block kind of belonged to us, or half of it anyway. And so we still had a big garden, and like we did in the country, and we had a cow, and we had chickens, and we had a hog pen. So, but during that time, you raised as much of your food and all as you didn't buy that much at the store. And so when it come time for hog killing, the neighbors come in and helped, and you gave them part of the meat, for helping butcher the hog. And of course, you lived in town, so you couldn't keep cows. So when your cow had a calf, well, you saved it for beef or you sold it. And so you raised most of what you ate. But we always had fresh butter and all, and Mama would sell that. People all around us wanted the fresh butter and stuff like that. So anyway, she would sell that. There was a theater there in Crane, a movie theater, and so us kids maybe once a week would go to the movies, and you walked everywhere you went because there was only one car in a household. mostly. And so we would walk, and it wouldn't matter if you had to walk home and it was late. If somebody stopped and said, "Do you need kids need a ride?" Well, you crawled in the car with them because there was no fear. You knew most everybody in town, and they just, there wasn't stuff like that going on so much. And you didn't know so much about what was happening in other towns that were close by because you didn't travel that much, or you didn't go that much to the other towns. You pretty well stayed in your own location. Well, Bernice was the oldest, and she had to be smart, So, and when she graduated from high school, well, she was there was only 11 grades. There wasn't a 12th grade. And so when she graduated, she only went to the 11th grade. And since there was only the 11th grade, they had what they called a junior scholarship. And Bernice got the junior scholarship because she was really smart. And of course, that's hard to live up to. But anyway, the other kids were not as smart as Bernice, and I wasn't either. Of course, time they got to me, brains was kind of running out, So, but anyway, all the kids graduated from school, and all the girls married, of course, but me. I was the only one still at home. And Daddy, they transferred him out to the Sand Hills, which is quite a few miles out of town. I don't know exactly how many, but they built a brand new camp out there of houses. So we had lived at the Guff camp before we moved out there. Living in the camp is really a good thing. I guess it's part of your salary because I think you paid $5 a month for rent this. And if anything went wrong with your house, if you needed any repairs or was out of water or something and it had to be fixed, well, you called a Guff office and they sent somebody out there to fix it. So they kept all your repairs done from the Guff office. And it cost you in all about $10 a month. And of course, nobody felt like they were just high-toned in town because everybody got about the same amount of money because everybody worked for one oil company or another. Daddy just worked for Guff. And so everybody made about the same amount of money. So you didn't have people prancing around at school thinking they're better than you. And our school, it was a good school, and it was one of the hardest in Texas, I think. Or I've heard that. It may not be true, and it may be. But anyway, that was a story out. Bernice was the oldest, and then it was Jean, and then June, and then May, and then me. And Jean, he loved to hunt and stuff like that, and he didn't stick around the house a whole lot. He would either take his gun and walk off out in the pasture, and be hunting rabbits or something, or birds. And so he wasn't around the house a whole lot. And when he was first or second year of high school, I guess, and he went to work for a rancher out of town. And so we didn't see him just real often, just when he'd get a day off or something, he could come home. But this guy was in a wheelchair. And so he pushed him around, different places. And he lived out there with him because I'm sure there was chores and stuff around the ranch that he wanted him to do. And then when he, of course, got older, he was drafted into the military. And he went to Kilgore to Aunt Edna's, my daddy's twin sisters. to visit them, and before he was to go into the service. And so when he was there, he was squirrel hunting, and he climbed up in a tree, and he fell out. When he fell out, he split his ankle. And so anyway, Daddy went down and got him and brought him home, and they operated on his leg and put a screw in his ankle. So he couldn't go to the service until all of this healed up. But when it did get completely healed up, then he went into the military, and he was in the, I want to say Seabees, but it was where they went ahead and they built bridges and stuff like that for the military to cross. I don't know exactly which rank of the military that's in. It may be Seabees but they went in first to get our military in to build the bridges and all. And when he got out, he went to work in the oil field where they drilled to see if there was oil there. And if there was, then they would move on to another location and locate the oil. And then the team would come in and drill the wells. But he moved around from one place to another all the time. But when he came home, he married Lynn while he was still in the service. And then when he got out, that's what they did. They moved around in Texas and close states by. But anyway, the rest of the girls were married to, Bernice married a guy that worked in the oil field, and June married a guy that worked. He worked in the office in the oil field, and May married a guy that was much older than her, and she, of course, her husband worked in the oil field too, but they were there at Crane. June and Bill lived in Fort Worth, and Bernice lived there in Crane. Her husband worked in the oil field there. My interest as a child I don't think that I just had a whole lot of interest. I think it was just getting through everything. I should have been more interested in my schoolwork and stuff, but I was in the band. In Crane, you could get in the band when you were in, I don't know, the lower grades, I guess, not just before you would get into high school. And so, of course, I didn't get a choice of the instrument I wanted to play. I had to get what they needed in the band, or what the band director felt like they were going to need. And so they put me on a trombone. I wasn't too crazy about it, but I did learn to play. And before ball games and stuff like that, you marched downtown. You marched through downtown. Of course, during those days, wasn't a whole lot going on besides a football game, and I guess everybody in town was going to go. Of course, my interest then was in that, because we had to do a lot of marching sometimes when, we all, of course, practiced at the ball field. It wasn't that far out to the ball field. And by the way, our house was just right across the street from the ball field. And so I guess during that time, the war was going on. And I'm not sure, but I know a lot of them did, because I didn't see the guys, but they had prisoners that they took, that they brought over here and built those rock walls and things like that. And the football field had one of those rock walls around it, not all the way, but partially. And they were wide enough that we could climb up there and walk around on top. And that was, of course, right across the street road from where we lived. And we used to go over there a lot, and play on that stuff over there where the guys would tackle a dummy and the rocks would, in the bucket on the other side would go up and down. And, of course, one day I was on there while the dummy was going down, and it broke my toe when it come down on the pipe. But, and we had to cut the where the toe of my shoe was, and I had to wear it for a long time till that toe healed. Well, during World War II, they took prisoners and they would bring them over here and do things like building fences. They built this big wide fence, across part of the football stadium. And I suppose the prisoners of war were the ones that built it because, we had heard stories about coming over, and them building them. But during that time, well, the men, the men all had to go to war when they bombed Pearl Harbor. And so the younger men went to war. And the older men, of course, did the jobs, that was left at home that had to be done. But anyway, we had, they rationed gasoline, and we had food, sugar, and just things like that were rationed because a lot of the food and stuff had to be sent to the men overseas that were fighting. And so we were rationed with things like that, gasoline, and I can't tell you all that was rationed, but I know there was quite a bit of stuff. Even some meats and stuff like that were rationed. Of course, we never felt the pain of being rationed unless it would be sugar. But there was enough kids in the family that we got mostly enough sugar, that we didn't feel a pain from that either. So of all the sweets and Mama would cook, or Bernice would cook when we were churning, which we churned, us kids did, every so many days, Mother would have so much milk saved up and ready to churn. So anyway, we didn't feel a whole lot of pain from the rationing, but I know a lot of people did. And that's probably the reason they wanted butter and stuff like that we had because of the rations, and they couldn't get enough. And they had oleo then. That's when it started coming out, and to make it look more like butter, it was kind of white when you bought it. And to make it look more like butter, they had a color that they could mash it up and put that color on it so it looked more like butter. It tasted like butter, but it wasn't really butter. But of course, we had the real stuff, so that didn't bother us either. But it did. A lot of people that just had one child or no children, or just maybe one or two children in the family would maybe be short of stuff. So anyway, you could kind of trade around, and everybody managed to work together on things like that. Not so much like they do nowadays, because nowadays they don't cooperate so much, but everybody was in the same boat. You didn't have so much outreach. You were just mostly in your own little town. And so everybody was pretty agreeable on stuff. But I know then when they had a prize fight or something like that, the speakers and all were in town. They had those on, and they were telling you all about the fight as it was going on. Of course, it was like on a radio, and everybody would be out around town somewhere and listening to how the fights were going on. And I guess it was more of a community type living then than it is now. Now, people don't get along as well, maybe because there isn't the need that it was then. And a lot of times, just for amusement, they'd go downtown and park on the street in the cars and watch people going up and down the street, and they would come out the car and talk to you and things like that. So, which today that would seem foolish to a lot of people. But we didn't know TV, and what news you got was over the radio. And a lot of the stories that you hear about now that they gathered around the radio to hear then, because all you had was the radio. And Billy and I had been married, Mike was a baby when we got our first TV. But, and there weren't that many people in town that had them. And, of course, I guess they hadn't had them in so many years, they didn't know that much about them. So it was kind of slow, but everybody began to get televisions and stuff like that. But if you had a TV on the night of wrestling, which was a big thing, then people would start coming to your house. Now, a lot of times we wouldn't be home, but Mom, Pop Dutton may go down to our house, and maybe Mother and Daddy was in town. They'd go down there to watch the wrestling on TV. And we'd come back to the house. Well, they'd be at the house watching wrestling on TV, and which wasn't unusual. A childhood memory, I can't tell you that there was just one that stood out, but to drive, I always wanted to drive. I guess I watched Daddy and whoever was driving in the car, and I don't think my other sisters really. Bernice drove because she graduated and went off to college, but I always wanted to drive. And a bunch of us kids would be out running around somewhere, and whoever's car it was, you end up driving it. And that's the way I learned to drive other people's car. And I imagine that a lot of men in town, if they knew that I was driving their car, learning to drive on their car, wouldn't have appreciated it. But anyway, that's kind of how I learned to drive. And then one day at school, a bunch of kids were talking about going down. You could go down and take a test to get your driver's license. I was just 13. But I thought, gee, that sounds pretty good to me. So I went down there with them. And I know Daddy fussed about it because he said that, well, Bernice didn't get hers. The first time she took it, she didn't pass the test. But I passed the test. And I had to go get Daddy out of work because he had to sign for me. So he came in. That's when he was fussing and said Bernice didn't get hers. But anyway, I passed the written test and took the driving test. I was scared to death I was going to not pass it. And when the guy, I knew that he was going to tell me to stop real quick, one of the things that he was going to tell me, and I was determined I was going to stop real quick. So I was really waiting for him to say stop, and when he did, I really threw him through the windshield almost. And but anyway, I got my driver's license. And I'm surprised, but Daddy, I would get to use the car every now and then. Daddy would let me drive it, but you did not touch the adjustment on the car. And Daddy had long legs, and so he was sitting on the edge like this, driving. But anyway, he would let me have the car every now and then to drive, to go to the movies or something. We lived in the Guff Camp, and at that time, and it was about a mile out of town. But then we moved to the Sand Hills, and it was about 20 or 25 miles out in the Sand Hills. So, I got the car every now and then to drive in. Most of the time, Mother was with me, but when Daddy had TB, let me see, I guess that was before I got my license, so 12 or 13. I was about 13. And anyway, I went to work, and they cut Daddy's salary to half. And I went to work in a cafe in town. I don't know why, but I always came in and I gave my check to Mama. I think she would save some of it back, but she might use some of it. I don't know. But anyway, she would, I know when we went to Tennessee on vacation, she would, she bought me a coat and things like that. I know, out of some of the money that I had made while I was working in the cafe there in Crane. But tips were not, your tips were your tips. When someone left a tip on the table, it went into your pocket. Nobody asked you if you got a tip or how much it was. It was your money. And so actually, I guess we made better than most of them did nowadays, according to the amount of money you had. You didn't have that much money to spend, but you didn't need that much. Yeah, he went to San Angelo, and when he was sick, he went to San Angelo and stayed down there in it was a hospital for people with tuberculosis. And I think he was down there about 8 or 9 months. And Bernice and Mama would go down ever so often and spend the day to San Angelo from Crane and spend the day with Daddy. And until he got out, and came home. And then he went back to work. I don't know. And during that time, I guess it was good because the companies cared enough about their people that when they were sick like that, they continued. They might cut their salary down, but they continued to pay their salary. And then when they got okay, they went back to work. But when the war ended, it was quite a celebration in town. Of course, they had the speakers out again, and all you could hear the radio and everything all over town, talking about the war ending and things like that. And people were out just everywhere, walking around, and happy and celebrating the fact that the war was over. Billy and I went to the same school. There was only one school there in Crane. And he was older than me. And so anyway, we had the same study hall. I was probably a freshman and he was probably a senior. But anyway, we had the same study hall. And we were sitting at the same table. He got to picking at me. We got to talking. And I usually had to stay in detention after school. So I would have to walk home, which was about a mile, and I had to walk past his house. And he'd go out on the porch and holler at me and whistle at me, and as I walked past their house going home. But anyway, he went in the service. But by the way, I think one of the kids said, did you go to prom? Sure, I went to the prom. He took me to the prom. But that was after he had been in the service and came home. But that was when I was a junior in high school. I think maybe a couple of times before I went to the prom, but it was maybe a bunch of us kids kind of crashed it, or we just went, And of course, probably somebody from the junior, senior class had asked us or told us, go up there, hey, go up there and dance. But, of course, my junior prom, I went to the banquet. He took me to the banquet first, and, of course, he left and then came back when the banquet was over, because it was just for the juniors and seniors. But we went down there, of course, in study hall, and, of course, since I was a junior, there was several of us went down there and started the decorations and stuff, and and decided what theme we were going to use and things like that. And of course, that makes you feel real good. You can take a off during class and go down there. But anyway, he took me to the prom, and of course, he and I got married then during before the senior year, just right when it was starting, and so I didn't graduate. We went to New Mexico. He was stationed in New Mexico, and so we moved. I moved down there with him, but someone had asked. I wore a long dress, a formal, and somebody asked what it was. Navy blue. It was pretty. I think Mama probably ordered it out of a magazine that was 17, teenage magazine, and she ordered it, and it was pretty. I wore it to the prom. We were married there in Crane in First Baptist Church. They had just built this new one, and it was big, and we were really the first ones married in it, but it wasn't a big wedding or anything. It was friends, kinfolks, neighbors that was there, and it wasn't in the main part of the church. It was in the room there at the side, and it was by that preacher, the First Baptist Church. Jimmy Slater and May stood up with us. And I wore a gray suit with a yellowish-looking, I don't know what color you'd call it, but anyway, it was a blouse. And I had a red hat, and I don't know what color my shoes were. Can't remember.
You said after that y'all moved to New Mexico?
And anyway, he went on back to the base, and he found us a place to live, and he called me, and a couple down the street from us. We lived out there in the Sand Hills in that camp, and a couple down the street. They were a young couple, and they were going on vacation, and they were going through New Mexico, or they was somewhere up in the mountains and all on the other side of New Mexico, and they were going through Roswell. And so I rode down there with them. And when we got in Roswell, they stopped at this service station, just going right through, and I called the base, and I didn't get him for a little while. Somebody else answered the phone, and he called back. It was called back in just a little bit, and they came and picked me up. We didn't even have a car. We didn't have a car, and he didn't have a way to work. The base was out of town about a mile, and so we got up real early, and he went down where some guys were standing on the corner that was going to the base, waiting for a ride. And when that ride came up, he crawled in the car with all of them and went to the base. Oh, and anyway, we bought an old, well, it wasn't a new car, it was an old car, but I guess it ran pretty good, because he bought it and the guy didn't guarantee it to get off the lot. And we went to West Texas from Roswell. We went to Crane in that thing. We left the car lot, mind you, when he didn't guarantee it to get off the lot, and went to Crane in it, and it drove fine. But anyway, we rented a garage apartment there in Roswell, New Mexico, and you had to walk across the backyard of some of the people that they were renting to get to our garage apartment, and we had to park out there on the road. And we decided one day that we was fixing to go somewhere in the evening, and we got out, walked out of the apartment, and the car was gone. And so, anyway, we decided we'd walk downtown and he could report it, to the police department. And I don't know why. Didn't seem like we got all the way down there, but we might have and reported it. But anyway, we came back home, and when we got home, the car was back. So I don't know who took it, but maybe they were smarter than we were. They figured it wouldn't last very long.
Did it have a full tank of gas?
I couldn't tell you. Maybe that's the reason they brought it back. Maybe it didn't have much gas in it. We had 3 children, and our oldest one was Mike, and he was born when we lived in Fort Worth. And we moved down there because Billy got on with aircraft, and I got on. Uncle Melvin and Johnny took me down to look for a job, and I got on with the telephone company. And we rented an apartment, the stockyards. We got an apartment on that side of town. And Billy went to work for close to the stockyards. It was on the same area as the stockyards, but it was changing human blood into polio serum and stuff like that. But anyway, he worked there, and I worked for the telephone company downtown. And I worked split shift, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the evening. And so I had to ride the bus to town and back because Billy had to have the car to go to work in. I was an information operator. And so if you didn't know your number and you called information, you would get either me or somebody that was working beside me, and I would find your number for you. They were having a strike at the time, just before Mike was born, and they had, I went down there to pick up my check. I went out on strike with all the others, but I went down there to pick up my check, and as I was going in, there were some news people down there, and they took a picture of me going into the telephone company, and I was just going for my check, but it said something about scabs that were crossing the line to work, I didn't work. I went out, I walked out just like the rest of them did. So, of course, they gave me a shower and everything, and I went. You could go out on leave for a year. And, of course, before the year was up, we moved back to Crane. But we thought Mike was never going to get here. He was supposed to be the first baby of the year, the doctor said, and he never showed up. And then we thought, well, he'll be born on Billy's birthday. And, of course, Billy's birthday came and went, no Mike. And finally, the 18th, and, of course, I didn't have 2 pains hardly until Billy was going to rush me to the hospital, and he did. And we were there 18 hours, I think, before Mike was born. But they went ahead and kept me, I guess. He had already sent castor oil out there for me to take and everything else, trying to throw me into labor. And I think it was probably 3 or 4 days after I drank the castor oil before I went into labor with Mike. Anyway, we moved back to Crane after Mike was born. It was, I don't know how long afterwards, but we moved back out there, and Billy went to work for a gasoline plant, and he played baseball on their baseball team. I think he was a pitcher. Anyway, that's when I went to the doctor, and they told me I was going to have twins. I knew something was wrong because I just didn't hardly know I was pregnant, and I was already I couldn't put anything on around the waist. And I thought, gee whiz, it's not the same. And the doctor said I was going to have twins and maybe even triplets. But anyway, of course, when Kayla was born, we lost her twin sister. And I never did look at the baby. They asked me if I wanted to, but the doctor said, told me really I shouldn't. And they asked me again, I guess, before we buried her, but I decided it was probably best that I didn't. Pop Dutton was helping them with the baby, and he said he thought it was better that I didn't. She had the places for her eyes, but no eyeballs, and she had the palate was not in her mouth. She didn't have a palate in her mouth, and on one side of her body she had an extra finger, and an extra toe. I guess it was better that I didn't. But Kale, even now, a lot of times she'll say, I just wonder a lot of times how it would have been if my sister had lived. And but I don't know, her and Robbie were awful close when they were little, and they played together a lot. And when he thought was going to get in trouble because he ran into a tree, come into the house one day in the truck, and her and him just worried about that, and they was both out there trying to fix that fender so he wouldn't know that Robbie went into the tree. We went to California after Cale was born, and Billy was kind of worried about that because we had, I don't know, before we got too far out, it was kind of in the evening. We had stopped at a drive-in, I think, to get to eat something. And there were some guys, a carload of guys that pulled in there, next to us, and they were going on, and they began to talk to us, asked us where we was going and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of worried Billy because we had the two little ones in the car with us, and Kale was not very old. She still was eating every about 4 hours, or maybe even a little more often, and because she weighed 4 pounds and 9 2/3 ounce when she was born, and they let her come on home. She was fine in every way, but she just didn't, wasn't very big. And she was smaller than the other baby. And she was 15 inches long. Anyway, she was little, so we let, he was, and then Mike was not very old. He was standing up there by Billy, and every time he'd go to sleep, I'd slide him back. We had the back seat built up level with the front, and I'd slide him back over on that bed we had built up across there for both of them. And as soon as his head had hit the lay down, he'd come up and slide back over and put his arm around Billy. And we couldn't, he was going to stand there no matter what we tried to do. And so anyway, he was kind of worried about the two kids, and those guys. He's afraid maybe, they were trying to drive along with us, and they probably really might have been thinking, well, if we had trouble or something, we could help out or something. And they probably wasn't anything wrong, but he was afraid, maybe it was. So we got on further down the road, and we got up ahead of them, and Billy pulled over and kind of pulled out the side of the restaurant wherever we pulled, and they went on by. So he waited till they got on down the road a ways before we went on, started driving. And we lived in California. We bought a house, and we lived out there a couple of years. It was about a couple of years, I guess. And then we moved back to Crane, and we sold our house out there in California. Let's see. Robbie was born in Dallas. Anyway, we moved to Dallas, and he got there. He got to where he couldn't find a job there in Crane, and we moved to Dallas. Freddie got out of the service, and he was moving. He was down there, and Billy was looking for a job, and he was kind of having a hard time finding one. He thought he might get back in aircraft because out in California, that's what he had worked in. But then they started laying off some of the people. When he got laid off, we went back to Crane. And so he thought maybe up at around Fort Worth or Dallas that he could find a job in aircraft. But he went to work. He got a job and went to work, and they laid off the next week. They started laying off out there. So anyway, he was looking for a job, and they Freddie went back in the military. And so Billy said, well, he just would too, because he was a staff sergeant, when he got out of the Air Force. And he thought he'd keep his rank, but he went back in, and it was a Naval Air Force, so they didn't give him his rank back. So he had to start out at a lower rank, and it wasn't very much money. But we lived on Bobby's place out in the country, and it was way out in the country. And, of course, we had one car. And Billy had to have it, and he was working at the Navy base, and then after work, he worked part-time at a bowling alley. And so he wasn't home with us very much. And Robbie, we got a dog out there. It belonged to the commander of the base, and I don't know. That was the wildest dog. We were way out in the country, and of course we just put him out there, and we didn't fool with him too much. But there would be a cat or something would roll up, lay on him and everything else. But we were afraid he was going to try to eat somebody up. But Robbie was just walking everywhere, and he liked Robbie. Robbie could go over there and put his arm around him and lay over on him and everything, and the dog was just fine. But nobody else could get very close to him. And so anyway, we lived out there for a while, and Billy was working for the fire department, and we moved to Euless. They were building those houses over there, close to that airport over at Euless, between Fort Worth and Dallas, out in the country where that airport was. It was out there close to it. Anyway, they were building housing tracts out there. So anyway, when they first started building them out there, we bought one of those houses, and we lived there. Well, Robbie started to school. No, you didn't start school till we moved over to Irving. But we lived at Euless, and we bought that house in Irving, and then it fell through on us because those people, when the airport was going to go through, were selling those houses over there. So we bought this house, and it was really, really nice. It was a big 2-story house, and it was the dining room and kitchen was huge, and it had a den and a living room and a huge, huge dining room and kitchen, and 2 of the biggest bedrooms you ever saw upstairs. And in fact, Robbie and Mike had those bunk beds in that big room. I don't know how many big boys they had in that big room, but it didn't even look like a drop in that room. It was huge. And then K.O.'s room was big too, and it was across the hall upstairs. And they had a bathroom up there, and of course they had 2 baths, one downstairs, one upstairs. And Anyway, we lived in that house until they really got down to building that airport out there, and they'd bought up all the houses, or was trying to, that they wanted. But those people said they couldn't find the title, to their house out there. And so we had to move. So we moved back to Euless, and of course, they were trying to start a restaurant in town, and that somehow or other they sold that house to the airport. I imagine they were offering them quite a bit of money for it. And so then we lived there until Billy decided he wanted some land through the Texas Veterans Loan, and so he bought this place out here. And we moved down here, and first we tore down a 10-room, 2-story house in Fort Worth and hauled the lumber off down here. And then we moved down here and started building the house. We loaded up everything and drove down here without a place to live. And he found the only place which was that we could find, that we went by and asked at the deal there in town, and they said that this guy rented houses. So we went by there, and he rented us a house. In what was the name of that place? Muletown. It was there in Van. But anyway, we lived in that house while we were trying to build this one out here. We had never built a dog house even. And so the Strain boys came down, and they helped Billy lay out the foundation and told him, I guess, how to build it. Anyway, they laid it out, and then Billy and I built it. And then we started building the house, and every time we'd run into something, we didn't know what to do. And of course, that was every time we changed one job to go to another one, because we didn't know anything about building a house. But he'd get in the truck and drive around till he saw a crew of men framing a house out, and he'd pull over there, and, everybody just tickled to death tell you how to do something if you don't know how. So he would ask them, and they'd tell him what to do and how to do it. So he'd come back then, and we'd work on it till we ran into something else we didn't know what was doing, and then he'd go back out and hunt up somebody else. But that's how we built the house down there. And as everybody will tell you that's had anything to do with it, that it's got more nails in it than any house you ever saw. They said when they moved it over that it didn't even give a bit when he picked it up on that nail to move it, because it had so many nails in it. Oh, yeah, in that old house, the fireplace, of course, this was talking to somebody. Neither one of us knew anything about building a fireplace or anything. But anyway, the first one, Billy would get irritated. We'd go out and the red rocks, the big old red rocks out here. Well, we started gathering those up, and so he would get irritated with it. So he was putting the rafters up, and so I started laying rock, building the fireplace. And when I got to the mantle, I didn't know what I was going to do, but some of the Strain boys was down. Billy was at the fire station, and they came by the house, and I was just fixing to top out at the mantle, and they said, "Oh, we've got the very thing you need on this." So they went off their house and come back with a piece of angle iron that fit right on the top where the mantle went, to hold the mantle as it went back. So then I built the fireplace. Oh, the second one. This one, like I said, it was hollow. It was wide and had a wide sack on it. And every man that came in the house had to fit over that fireplace. But the tile you put up there for the smoke to go up, I didn't know you're supposed to build that fireplace deal solid that would go up against those tile. So it was hollow. And so they broke, slipped or broke, and it would smoke. We would build a fire in it, and it would smoke the house up. And the kids would go around throwing windows open. They say, everybody's going to think we smoke. We smell just like smoke. You'd get all the smoke out of the house and then close the windows, and you wouldn't get the house heated up again till it was full of smoke. So anyway, we had to tear that one out. And the next one, Billy had found a place that they threw rejects away of brick. And so he brought those home, and that one we built out of brick, or I did. And I built it, when he was gone. He called one night and said, where are the kids? And I said, I don't know. They all gone. And anyway, he said, well, have you got the front door locked? And I said, no. And he said, you go in there right now and lock the front door. And I said, okay, bye, And of course, as I walked across the living room, I look over there and that whole wall's out because I'm building a fireplace and there's nothing in there but a piece of plastic covering up the opening. So anyway, I thought it was kind of funny that I was trying to lock the door and you could step in the back if you wanted to. Well, we built this house. Billy sold 25 acres of this land to build this house. And that guy that Ron and Jim that lived over there that had log homes, that was the guys that started the house, drew it off on a piece of paper. And anyway, their houses were built like this, only both of them were bigger than this one. And since it was just he and I, well, I guess they made it smaller. They didn't make it as large. But I don't know what Jim's house was. Ron's house was, but Jim's was like this, only it was further that way, and there was a study in between the the bed where the bedroom is and this part of the house right there. There was a study in between there. And then there was a stairway that went up from their bedroom upstairs, and it made the house longer. And the upstairs, it had the extra bedroom. That extra room over their bedroom, it was a large room, but it was a playroom for kids. Billy and his brother and his family, the whole family, they were they fun-loving people or something. You were always laughing. There was always stuff going on. And any time they all got together, I don't care if it was just three of them, Mom, Pop Dutton and Billy, and Coco with them, or if you went anywhere to see any of their folks, everybody around that was kin to them or anything, they all gathered there at the house. And everybody brought their instruments, their guitars or the fiddles. And if they didn't have a piano, one of the others that had one, they'd load it up in the back of a truck and bring it over. So they all, if they got together, they were picking and singing and playing and laughing and going on, till, it'd be 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning before everybody went home. But, anytime they all got together or some of them come in or something, they always brought their musical instruments and they always played. Well, now as a child, I went to the Tabernacle Baptist Church. And I was pretty young. Daddy would go, every now and then down there. And I went down there. But he didn't go all the time. He went to, they'd started a men's Bible class downtown, and that's where he went on Sunday morning. And I still went to the Tabernacle Baptist Church. But the people next door to us had a big ranch down around Fort Stockton too. And I don't know, the man made his money ranching and trading in cows and all kinds of stuff. And they sold that home and moved to Fort Stockton, to that ranch they had down there. And later on, we heard that man, the boy, that their son that was about my age, just a little bit older, we heard that he got drugged to death on a horse. He was riding the horse. He fell off and his foot hung in the stirrup, and he got dragged to death. And I was a little kid, and he was about my age. I knew him. Of course, they lived right next door to us, and that was horrifying to me. I guess if you say something that stands out, that really stood out to me as a little kid. I just, that the thoughts of all of that scared me. And of course, they came back to Crane and buried him because they hadn't been down there very long, and I guess that was church they went to. But anyway, I know even not too long before May died that, she'd go to town and get her hair permed or cut or something. And she went to this girl, and it happened to be one of the, I don't know whether it was an aunt or a sister or related to that boy in some way. But it made an impression on those people because I was a little kid and I went to that funeral by myself. And, but that, it's just something that I worried about for a long time. And it was, I guess kids do things like that. When I was 13, about 13 years old, I was going to church. We, us girls, would get up on Sunday morning and would go to church. We'd walk across town to the First Baptist Church, and that's where we went. And while we were doing that, during that time, I know one Sunday morning, I couldn't tell you what the preacher preached on or anything like that. I don't know whether I was paying that much attention or not, being a kid. But anyway, when it was my birthday. It was on my birthday. And when they started to give the invitation, I had no idea I was going up there. And when I realized what was happening or where I was out in the aisle, and I was almost up to the front. And but I do know that, well, you probably heard Brother Robbie talk about, I started crying. I couldn't quit, and I just, I don't know. Like I said, I couldn't tell you anything, but I know I was really drawn up there to the front, and gave my life to Christ. I like the stories about David, and but I liked also the signs of the time in Matthew, and it seems like there's still the signs of the time in another book in the New Testament. It's not Matthew, but it's another one. It's the same, almost the same. I want my grandkids to remember, and I think they know, that I love every one of them. And I hope they remember that. And like I was telling Penny, I may have given them advice, and it may not have been the best advice in the world, but at that time I thought it was.